Poland and Hungary in suspending grain and other food imports from Ukraine. They say cheap Ukrainian grain is driving down local prices. European Union officials have now announced that they will be meeting this week to discuss Ukrainian grain exports issues within the bloc. The Polish ban followed protests by farmers there, as well as the resignation of the agriculture minister. But for the very latest on all those stories, let's bring in Arise chief correspondent John Cookson, who joins me live from London. Good to see you, John. Let's start with the Russian opposition activist, Vladimir Kara-Murza. He's been given 25 years in prison. And I suppose that underscores the fact that speaking out against the war in Ukraine or against Vladimir Putin is a dangerous act for anyone in Russia.
Hey, Charles, very dangerous act. In fact, that's the maximum sentence ever handed out since the war began for those speaking out against the invasion of Ukraine. One has to, think of him and his family tonight as he heads very shortly to one of 800 Gulag-style barracks, if you could call them that, in the wilds of Russia, possibly in Siberia, where there are 800 of these establishments dotted across the country, and conditions are harsh, and that's an understatement. Prisoners are not allowed to speak to each other. They must stand up between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night. They have to work. They're not so much prisons, more like barracks. Food is minimal. Healthcare is, again, minimal. And it is extremely harsh. And 25 years, as I say, is the maximum sentence ever handed out to a dissident. Interestingly, Charles, I was looking back at his family, and I see that his grandfather he survived a time in a Soviet labor camp. His maternal grandfather was executed by Stalin, and his great-great-uncle was involved in the assassination of a Russian official, and he too was executed. So this family, the Kara-Murza family, have certainly paid the price for dissent in Russia. Charles.
That's extraordinary, John. I'm just about the man himself, Vladimir Kara-Murza. I mean, he doesn't appear to be very well known himself in Russia, though he's apparently very influential within opposition circles, which is possibly why he got such a heavy sentence.
Yeah, I think you're right, Charles. He spent his early years as a journalist, working in Europe and also in America. But it's these anti-war speeches that he's made since the invasion began last February, and one in particular to US politicians in Arizona. And this has deeply upset the Kremlin. The Kremlin incidentally saying tonight that they never comment on cases and the sentence that was handed out to him. But he certainly had a following in Russia and was obviously viewed by the regime as being very influential. And he spoke about Russian war crimes in Ukraine, which has always been denied by the Kremlin. But myself as a broadcaster, discovered war crimes myself when I was in Ukraine twice. And there are thousands and thousands of proven examples of war crimes carried out by Russian forces, including the use of cluster bombs. So it was this influence and the fact that he pinpointed abuses by Russia, which has upset the Kremlin, and the sentence was handed out today.
John, let's move away from that particular story to another one in that region. Slovakia joining Poland and Hungary in suspending grain and other food imports from Ukraine. I mean, that can't be good for Ukraine.
No, but I mean, there is an absolute vast market for Ukrainian grain and wheat and other breadbasket commodities that Ukraine supplies. You already indicated that the reason why those three nations, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, have put a ban on Ukrainian wheat is because they produce so much themselves that the farmers in their own countries were protesting that the Ukrainian wheat was driving the price down. I suspect that under the Black Sea grain deal, which was agreed between Russia, Turkey, and the UN and Ukraine last year, will continue in it pretty much in its present form because there's as I said earlier, there's an insatiable demand for grain in the rest of the world, not least in Africa and East Africa in particular. There was some good news, though, out of Slovakia today for Ukraine. The Slovakians agreed to supply 13 MiG jet fighters, which will be greatly appreciated by the regime in Kiev.
John, thanks very much indeed. John Cookson, Arise chief correspondent, talking to me there.